A weary capybara navigates the dense, humid grasslands of the Brazilian wetlands. What causes the animal to pause and shiver in the stagnant, heavy air? Small, inflamed spots irritate the skin beneath the dense coat of this capybara. Does this single tick explain the restlessness slowing the capybara's daily rhythm? As the capybara rubs against the wood, the skin tension visibly lessens. Will the encroaching infestation overtake the capybara before it can find relief? The skin tone softens, a subtle sign the capybara is finding temporary calm. What lies beneath the thick, matted fur, hidden from the capybara's own reach? The capybara shakes its head, and the movement is now steadier than before. Can this brief period of stillness provide the capybara with the rest it requires? A dry, crusted puncture mark lingers where a tick fed on the capybara. The capybara navigates the wet grass. Why do the thick layers of fur offer no protection against biting? Hundreds of ticks feed beneath the hair. Will the constant itching eventually drive the capybara to collapse? The skin reacts to each bite. Does the inflammation spreading across the flank signify a deeper, worsening infection? A tick remains anchored tight. Can a host survive if its skin is under such constant, localized attack? The capybara attempts to reach the area. Will self-grooming succeed where the ticks have already taken hold? Teeth glide over the matted fur. Is the irritation becoming too intense for the capybara to ignore? A tiny crust forms where a tick has fed. Does this mark the limit of the skin's recovery? Cattle tyrants watch from the reeds. Why do these birds fix their gaze upon the wandering capybara? The cattle tyrant approaches. Is the proximity of the bird a sign of impending conflict, or something else? Stillness settles over the capybara. Will the birds interpret this lack of movement as an opportunity for food? The cattle tyrant finds a tick. Can this interaction ease the constant biting of the embedded parasites? Will these cattle tyrants tolerate the presence of the resting capybara to find their meal? The cattle tyrants land, searching for a source of protein amidst the matted, coarse fur. The capybara remains motionless as a cattle tyrant probes near an inflamed, red puncture mark. Tugging firmly, the cattle tyrant pries the tick free from the capybara's skin. Feeding on the shoulder, the cattle tyrant pulls at a dry, scaly patch of skin. With the irritation fading, the capybara's eye clears and its breathing steadies. A single tick drops, leaving a tiny puncture mark on the capybara's exposed hide. The fallen tick burrows into the damp soil, where it will soon deposit its eggs. The capybara stops rubbing its flank, indicating a decrease in its localized itching. A cattle tyrant probes the joint, searching for parasites wedged beneath the thick skin folds. The skin remains red and punctured, a sign that the recovery must continue over several days. Will the cattle tyrant investigate the hindquarter where the capybara cannot reach with its own teeth? The capybara remains motionless as the birds land, But will its tolerance hold during this persistent feeding? With each probe, the bird hunts for ticks hidden deep against the skin surface. Can the removal of these parasites reduce the constant itching that plagues the capybara? Does the removal of these scabs signify the start of a long-term improvement for the host's skin? As the birds work, the irritation begins to settle, allowing the capybara to stand with renewed stability. What happens to the soil-dwelling stages of the ticks that now drop into the wet marshland? In the damp mud, these parasites find a hidden sanctuary to begin their next life cycle. Will the cattle tyrant find more sustenance on the remaining unreachable patches of the capybara? Each small meal for the bird is a brief moment of respite for the tired capybara. Can the skin ever fully recover from the puncture marks left behind by hundreds of these parasites? Can the capybara find enough calm to stop its restless pacing in the wetlands? As the cattle tyrant feeds, the capybara remains motionless, its flank now showing fewer visible parasites. What will happen to the fluid-filled puncture mark once the tick is finally pulled away? The cattle tyrant consumes the tiny parasite, leaving the skin twitching in the humid air. Does this persistent picking influence how often the capybara rubs against the tall marsh grass? The cattle tyrant pries at the dried scabs, searching for hidden sustenance among the dense hair. Are these puncture marks becoming less inflamed as the birds continue to forage here? The capybara now stands with weight distributed evenly, a sign that the constant itching has faded. What hidden parasites remain beneath the thick tail fur where the birds cannot yet reach? The cattle tyrant tugs, and the parasite releases its grip, leaving behind a small red site. Where will these fallen parasites go, and what becomes of the eggs they carry within? Will the capybara find relief as more cattle tyrants land near its damp flank? The cattle tyrant probes the damp fur, seeking ticks hidden near the skin. Does the removal of this single tick reduce the capybara's constant twitching discomfort? The bill grips the parasite firmly and pries it from the tender skin. What lies beneath the thick matted fur near the joint that the birds haven't reached? Can the capybara stand still long enough for the cattle tyrant to clear the shoulder? The bird tugs, the tick releases, and the skin remains exposed to the humid air. Does the reduction in parasites lead to more frequent periods of rest? The cattle tyrant finds nourishment, while the capybara remains perfectly still. Why do the ticks concentrate in these specific moist folds of the skin? The parasite falls, leaving only a tiny puncture mark on the capybara's skin. Will the cattle tyrant return to the capybara's neck for more ticks? The cattle tyrant probes the thick fur near the neck, searching for the next parasite. Why does the capybara remain motionless while the cattle tyrant pulls at the skin? Each removal reveals a raw, red puncture mark where the tick once fed. How many ticks will the cattle tyrant find on this patch of skin? The cattle tyrant extracts a tick, leaving the surrounding crusty skin visibly agitated. What happens to the discarded tick once it falls into the marshy soil? A tiny crater remains where the parasite was, showing the extent of the damage. Will the capybara continue to find relief as it moves through the tall grass? The cattle tyrant probes the flank, looking for any missed parasites. Can the cattle tyrant finish clearing the remaining ticks from this area? The capybara moves across the marsh, but can its heavy, skin-deep irritation ever truly be relieved? As the cattle tyrants feed, will the constant, sharp twitching of the capybara begin to subside? The bird pulls at the tick, and the capybara stands still, no longer trying to rub against the earth. With each removed tick, where do the parasites go once they drop into the tall, wet marsh grass? The capybara stays still, but what happens to these tiny, hungry ticks once they reach the saturated soil? The skin discoloration begins to fade, but will this temporary partnership suffice to protect the animal from future outbreaks? Each puncture mark reveals the damage, so how long will it take for these marks to dry completely? The environment sustains both bird and host, but what becomes of the tick larvae within the mud? Scratching pauses. Yet does the capybara sense the benefit of the cattle tyrant feeding on its back? The animal stops shaking its head. Could this be the first true sign of lasting physical restoration? This remaining tick probes the skin, so how many more thousands are waiting to emerge from the grass? Why does the capybara focus its attention on the remaining cluster of parasites near its groin? Can the cattle tyrant safely reach the sensitive, hairless skin of the groin area? The bird probes the crease where the skin remains most swollen and inflamed. It grips the parasite, twisting until the mandibles release their hold. The capybara remains motionless, allowing the cattle tyrant to continue its search. What happens to the discarded ticks as they fall into the soft, wet mud below? The cattle tyrant consumes its prize and immediately looks for the next feeding opportunity. As the density of parasites drops, the birds take to the air in search of other hosts. The capybara stops its restless pacing, its breathing patterns finally stabilizing after weeks of irritation. Is the balance of this wetland ecosystem truly restored after the departure of the birds? Biological reality dictates that the next generation of parasites has already begun its silent development. As the cattle tyrants depart, does the lingering population of ticks remain dormant in the marsh grass? What will happen to these thousands of tiny parasite eggs left behind in the saturated marsh soil? Will the next generation of ticks emerge before the capybara can fully strengthen its skin barrier? Nature maintains a cycle where balance is found in the fleeting partnership of host and tiny feeders.